Hello everyone, welcome back to the Hand Spinner Review Spot YouTube channel. You can head over to our Facebook page, the link's in the description, for various written reviews and all manner of features and details and images and everything else hand spinner related over there. What we're looking at today is a bit of a classic of the hand spinner world. This is the Axis Micro from Last Room Standing. Last Room Standing are headed up by Alexander White and have been a really firm fixture from pretty early on as hand spinners started to flourish and we started to see more things available on the market than just the torque bar. And it is, I would consider it, as close as we can get in this very young market, a classic design alongside things like the torque bar itself and the stubby and those sorts of things. The Axis Micro really is one of the classic designs and really an archetype for the tri-spinner world. So, this particular Axis Micro was from the first general release of them. Since then, things have changed a little bit, and we'll come on to that. This is stainless steel with stainless steel buttons and stainless steel weights. There was a tungsten weighted version in the first batch, and you could also purchase it with brass weights and a copper body, I believe. There might have been another couple of mixtures, but those were the main materials involved in the production. Since then, we've seen brass versions. And there's a titanium version that's been up for pre-order as well, although I'm not sure if at the time of recording this any of those have been shipped yet. Alexander White at Last Room Standing has also released a bar spinner that's up for pre-order, I believe, at the time of posting. So it's well worth having a look at what they're up to, because this is a very impressive piece. That said, there are some drawbacks. And when I did my written review of this early Axis Micro, I pointed those out pretty considerably, and I'm going to do that again today, but with the caveat that some things have changed in the production of these, which has reduced the problems. So really, some of the problems we're going to discuss today are only a factor that you'd find if you were purchasing on the secondary market, more than likely, but there are a couple of things that are worth mentioning, which are ubiquitous just as a result of the design. So, before we get on to talking about the Axis Micro itself in more depth, let's just do a quick tri-spinner size comparison. The Turnian from NTO Designs, the Trillium, which has already been reviewed on the page and on the channel. A bit of a hyped up spinner there. That's got a magnetized bearing, by the way. That's why it's doing that. I need to demagnetize that. That's a compass, a tri-compass by Zero Feud, and I'm knocking everything everywhere. And that is the tri-stubby. On top of that, we'll just place a torque bar in frame so you can see how. You can see there's lots of free spinning stuff going on here, so everything's deciding not to play ball. But there you go. That gives you a vague idea of the outline. It's slightly smaller than the compass. It's a very similar footprint to your Turnian there, and a pretty similar footprint to, although you can see the way that the lobes work make it stick out a little, but it's a relatively similar footprint also to your tri-stubby. So let's move these guys out of the way and come back on to the actual reason we're here to look at. Okay, what makes this a pretty early classic design, I think, most importantly, are the ergonomics. It's incredibly easy to flick. There's loads of negative space between the weights, and any way you catch this, whether you're doing a reverse or forward flick, I mean, you'll be able to see. You don't really ever have an issue where you catch it in the wrong position. So if you're someone who just wants to sit and fidget and you don't want to have, you don't want to worry about the timing of it or anything like that, you just want something that's really ergonomic, I would say you'd be hard pushed to beat an Axis Micro. Part of that is down to these very wide chamfers, which I'm probably not going to be able to show you, but you can see your finger actually angles on those almost perfectly, and that's really quite an impressive piece of design work. Very, very, very comfortable. The other thing that makes this quite fidget friendly is the fact that it's running a 608 bearing. Now, 608 bearings were, this is one of the things we'll come on to as a slight drawback, but 608 bearings were very much the first common bearing outside of the torque bar. Most of the bearing wraps were done in that. Sorry, forgive me, this is not the easiest one in the world to take the buttons off. Actually, I might be at a point where I can't. Or can I? Oh, yes, I can. We'll get to this as one of the problems with the Axis Micro, at least the early Axis Micros, shortly. But there you go. There we are. Now these shipped with a Bones red ceramic, which is a very well regarded 608 bearing. This one actually is running a 2RS Pro hybrid ceramic. I switched these out. They're both very good bearings. I just happen to particularly like the feel of these ones. There's zirconium oxide as opposed to the silicon nitride that you got in the original bearing that came with these. It's pure personal taste. There's nothing particularly wrong with the previous bearing that was in there, and indeed I would still use it with that quite happily. This just has a slightly more unique character. 608 bearings in themselves have quite a unique character. They feel springy, very different to what you'd expect for an R188, that you'd find in something like the Stubby or the Torque Bar. It has really its own unique feeling. I've said unique about 5 times now, so you know what I mean. It has its own thing, its own vibe, and when you use them, I think they're very good for fidgeting. They've been kind of passed over now, and I think that's a bit of a shame. I was quite dismissive of 608s when I was first interested in spinners, and I quickly learnt that I was very wrong to be so dismissive of them, and I'd like to see some makers looking to employ them, particularly the really high quality ones or the very cost effective ones like the bearing you see in front of you here, because they do work very, very well for a specific sort of sensation. So actually, before I put the buttons on, let's just mention one of the gripes. Basically, the tolerances in machining. Alexander White outsources his machining to different companies, there's nothing wrong with that. Not everyone who makes spinners has their own machine shop or anything of that nature. They're designers or CAD programming guys. They come up with a really nice design and they want it made. Nothing wrong with that at all. These early ones were from a specific machine shop that I believe are no longer handling the Axis Micro, and the buttons were very, very snug. So that's not moving from out of that bearing. Now I can get a little piece of plastic or something and jimmy that off, and it's not the end of the world by any means, but the tolerances weren't great. And on top of that, you might be able to see some machining marks on this, which they're not bad by any means, but I think for the price that the Axis Micro sells for, it wasn't the most perfect piece of work. And Alexander White was very receptive to that criticism and has looked to change the machining shop. You can also see that the screw is very short. Again, not the end of the world, a nitpick at absolute most, but these little things just all add up to cause a few problems. They're by the by though, because the design itself is very good, and there's no reason why with a different machine shop this wouldn't be basically the perfect fidget spinner. It really is that good when it comes to just wanting something that has a little bit of tactile feedback but not too much, that's very comfortable in the hand. My main issue from a design point of view is what you can see here. This is a little set screw, a little hex bolt grub screw that secures the bearing by pressing into the side. So instead of this being a press fit or a glue fit like you would get on something like the Tri-Stubby there, this is held by the friction created by screwing that in. There are problems with doing anything like that, and as you might have already seen, the way I have mine set up, with relatively small amounts of force, I can push the bearing backwards and forwards. And the reason that I have it set like that is because I want as little friction on the bearing as possible, because when you tighten that screw, you will slightly deform the outer race and put pressure on the bearing balls themselves as they're running. You'll find that the character of the whole piece changes as you tighten that. You get more and more and more tactile feedback. For some people that might be great, and there's no question at all that having a set screw method like this means that people can swap out bearings very easily, and I completely understand the thinking behind it. However, for me personally, I would much rather have seen them glue this bearing. I think it would have been a better spinner overall, and it is a question of personal taste, there's no question about that, but for me, and this is my review I suppose, it's not perfect, and it does detract from the Axis Micro for my personal tastes. Personally, I'd have liked to have seen maybe 3 bolts so you could have balanced the tension between the 3 and hopefully stopped too much deformation of the bearing. I think it was felt when this was originally designed that would be too much hassle and annoyance for most customers, and they may well have a point there. So, spin time. It's not a long spinner. It was never intended to be a long spinner. Even with the tungsten weights, it's not a terribly long spinner. I get maybe 2 minutes out of the Axis Micro. I'm sure you could probably get more with the cleanest possible bearing and maybe spending a bit more time considering the spin. But for me, that's really not why you own an Axis Micro. You own an Axis Micro because it feels great to flick. That's why. It's not the most stable in the world. The tolerances aren't perfect. There's a little bit of wobble on that button. I wouldn't be surprised at all with the new machining shop that Alex is using if that's now gone away. But with the way the bearing's secured, it's quite likely that you're always going to find a little bit of wobble. But I think in a design like this, it actually serves to give it a bit more feedback. And when you're in the mood for that, if you're someone like me, if that's your bag, that's what you like, it works very, very well. It's also, I think, one of my favourite things about the Axis Micro, actually, before I bring this video to a close, and I can't really capture it on the video that well, is that anytime you have a polished sphere in a spinner, I'm quite happy. And the reason for that is just the fact that I love how hypnotic the reflections you get off of them are. And that's a great thing. I'd like to see more spinner companies use it. You see Wes at Aluma FX with his 6-shooter and what have you. He uses those. Actually, we'll be featuring those spinners at some point. And I just think it always looks great. You also get a bit of it off something like the Trillium as well. And anytime you have something like that, I find it really enjoyable to use and very pretty to look at. So yes, that is the Axis Micro. You'll see them around on various pages for sale on the secondary market, and there are still pre-order sales done on the last stream standing website. So you can always find things about the Axis Micro. They hold their value quite well, and quite rightly, it's a classic design. And for me, it's still one I will gladly carry when I want something that's extremely easy to fidget with, very ergonomic, and gives me that little bit of tactile feedback that maybe something like the aforementioned Trillium wouldn't. Thank you very much, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.